Well, that's a good opportunity to tell everyone to shut their phones off so we're not interrupted. So, when we gather as a community for funerals, we look to our Psalms for some words of solace in a time of pain. We were given as a heritage a large book of Psalms, but a few were chosen for these moments in two categories. One category is the one that teaches us that life is fragile and that life is finite, and that we should learn to count our days and to treat every day as a gift, and to make sure that every one of those gifted days is spent doing good deeds and being good people. So this is Psalm 1. אשרי האיש אשר לא הלך בעצת רשעים, ובדרך חטאים לא עמד, ובמושב לצים לא ישב. כי אם בתורת אדוני חפצו, ותורתו יגע יומם ולילה. והיה כעת שתול על פלגי מים, אשר פיו ייתן בעתו, ועליהו לא ייבול, וכל אשר יעשה יצליח. לא כן הרשעים כי אם כמוץ, אשר תדפנו רוח. על כן לא יקומו רשעים במשפט, וחטאים בעדת צדיקים. כי יודע אדוני דרך צדיקים, ודרך רשעים תאבד. Happy is the one who has not followed the counsel of the wicked, nor stood in the path of sinners, nor sat in the company of the scornful. Rather, that one's delight is in the Torah of the Lord, meditating in God's Torah day and night, and will be like a tree planted by streams of water, that yields its fruit in season, whose leaf will not wither, and whatever that one does prospers. Not so the wicked, who are like chaff that the wind drives away. Therefore the wicked shall not survive judgment, nor sinners in the assembly of the righteous. For the Lord loves the way of the righteous, and the way of the wicked is doomed. At this time, I'd like to call on our Rabbi David Bachman, to come forward to recite a psalm as well.
לדוד מזמור, לאדוני הארץ ומלואה תבל ויושביה, כי הוא על ימים יסדה, ועל נהרות יכונניה. מי יעלה בהר אדוני ומי יקום במקום קודשו, נקי כפיים ובר לבב, אשר לא נשא לשווא נפשי, ולא נשבע למרמה. יישא רחמי את אדוני וצדקה מאלוהי אישו, זה דור דורשיו, מבקשי פניך יעקב סלע. The earth is the Lord's and its fullness. The world is God's and all its inhabitants. God founded the world upon the seas, setting it firm upon flowing waters. Who may ascend the mountain of the Lord? Who may stand in God's holy place? One who has clean hands and a pure heart, who takes not God's name in vain, swearing falsely. that one will receive a blessing from the Lord, a just reward from the God of deliverance. Such is the generation of those who seek God, who, like Jacob, long for God's presence.
We also have with us today cantors Sergei and Alana Schwartz, who are actually mishpacha of the Drabkins, and I'd like to call on Cantor Schwartz to come forward for a psalm as well.
מזמור לדוד, אדוני רואי לא אחסר. בנודה שירביצני על מי מנוחות ינחלני. נפשי ישובב ינחני במאגרי צדק למען שמו. גם כי אלך בגיא צל מוות, לא ירא רע כי אתה עמדי. שבטך ומשענתך המה ינחמוני. תערוך לפני שולחן נגד צורריי. גישנת בשמן ראשי כוסי רוויה. אך טוב החסד ירדפוני כל ימי חיי. ושבתי בבית אדוני לאורך ימים.
Pearl Meppen Drabkin. She enjoyed the love of a beautiful family, and they're going to honor her today with words from their hearts. But I had an opportunity to speak briefly with Jess yesterday, and he sent me his full account of what is in his heart about his mom. I'd just like to excerpt a few lines of it. Pearl was born in 1929, and during her life, she enjoyed the love of her family and friends. But she also dealt with tragedy, most notably the loss of her husband, Solomon, and her son, Stephen, who she cared for so devotedly for years, since he suffered with a chronic and debilitating disease from childhood. But she is survived by her son, Jess, and so many other family members and friends who you will hear more about in Jess's comments. Pearl was smart and beautiful, a great teacher, a loving wife, and a devoted mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother. So, before I turn the podium over to Jess and to others who will speak, I want to touch upon one more facet of Pearl's life, which we really can't gloss over. It was such an important principle that led her and guided her. She was a self-described atheist. Now, some of you might think, how is that possible, to be such a committed and involved Jew and yet be an atheist? Well, the truth is that Judaism has many forms: cultural, racial, religious. And God describes for us in the Bible itself God's intent to give us freedom of choice. So while I don't intend to get into a whole theological debate here today about what it means to be a good Jew and an atheist at the same time, let's just all agree that Pearl was able to do just that. Be a good Jew. She immersed herself in Jewish culture and gave freely of her time and efforts to benefit all kinds of causes, including Jewish causes, even if in her heart she had strong doubts about God's existence. Maybe she didn't have doubts. Maybe she wholeheartedly believed that God doesn't exist. Even so, I believe she probably had doubts, because we all have doubts. And it's okay, because these were her choices to make. And as you'll hear from Jess in a moment, his mom lived her life on her own terms, without apologies and without regrets. And for this, I have a ton of respect for her. So Jess will come up at this time. Michael, you're going first? Okay, Michael's going first.
Today we remember and celebrate the life of Grandma Pearl. She was in so many ways a wonderfully unique and remarkable woman. Though she wasn't religious, in fact she was quite anti-religious, as you heard, she had a deeply Jewish identity. She was born just before Passover in 1929 and given the Hebrew name Pesach. And then she passed on Rosh Hashanah. Her life was bookended by these meaningful moments on the Jewish calendar. Grandma Pearl was a teacher through and through, earning her teaching degree before she was even 20 years old and skipping 3 grades in school. She had a sharp mind and a deep love of learning. And she passed that on by sharing many experiences with me, from walking around museums to going to see Broadway shows. But my favorite was always when she took me on a trip to Toys R Us. She had some of those quintessential grandmother qualities, like always having old candies in tins around her living room and always getting lipstick on my cheeks when she kissed me hello. She always appreciated a phone call, even if she kept them short, because she didn't want to take up my time. Always thoughtful. She was so proud of the accomplishments of her family, valuing education and celebrating every success. You know, Dad and me and my sisters. I think she was really proud of everybody. And she always worried that she was sick her whole life. For years and decades, she was very worried that she would be sick and she would die young and have all these issues. But despite herself, it turned out she lived to the ripe old age of 96, and she was healthy and relatively strong for the vast majority of that. We'll remember her for all of these things and more, and she'll always be a part of our hearts.
My grandma Pearl saw a whole lot in her time on Earth. Born in 1929, the year the Great Depression began, she made it all the way up to the chaos that is 2025. In 1949, she graduated from Queens College, which was a remarkable feat at the time as a first-generation American and a woman. My siblings and I were fortunate to have spent countless Jewish holidays, Mother and Father's Days, Thanksgivings, and birthdays with Grandma Pearl, well into her 90s. I should mention, virtually all of these occasions were put on by my mom, Eva, who is truly the world's best daughter-in-law. While Grandma Pearl wasn't able to leave the house as much in the last couple of years, these years were particularly special to me in that when we spent time together, we could really talk without any distractions. I'd ask Grandma Pearl to tell me stories about her life. For instance, I learned all about the summer she met my Grandpa Saul. Grandma Pearl was 19. Her and Grandpa Saul were paired up to work together as busboy and waitress in the Catskills. By Grandma Pearl's own account, she wasn't much of a waitress. Right away, she thought Grandpa Saul was very handsome. But at first, she really got on his nerves. You see, Grandma Pearl had a habit of breaking dishes. And yet, the two of them soon fell head over heels in love and were inseparable. They got married on New Year's Eve in 1949 when Grandma Pearl was 20. From then on, Grandma Pearl became a devoted mother and teacher. When I decided to go to law school in 2021, Grandma Pearl was my biggest cheerleader. As words of encouragement on my journey to become a lawyer, Grandma Pearl often gave me her signature catchphrase, "That's terrific, Toots." Grandma Pearl always told me how lucky I am to have such a wonderful father. She couldn't be more right. I love you, Dad. You have set a tremendous example on how a son or daughter should care for a parent. Grandma Pearl, we love you and we'll miss you.
My Grandma Pearl was truly one of a kind. She had a deep love of learning, and spending time in her house over these past few days made that so clear. On one shelf, you might find books on learning French or Yiddish. Nearby were piles of folders filled with New York Times clippings of articles she found thought-provoking, and her curiosity about the world never faded. Grandma also cared deeply about social justice. Her home was filled with pamphlets from organizations like Planned Parenthood, the American Federation of Teachers, and the Sierra Club. No matter her age, she gave generously to causes and politicians she believed in, always holding on to the hope that the world could become a better place. She was equally devoted to her family history. In her home were family trees she had carefully preserved and email correspondences with relatives as she worked to piece together our story. She even helped maintain a burial society in Żurawów, Poland, started by her father, Sam, in the 1960s. Sam's father, Józef Svi, served in the Chevra Kadisha there. She and I shared both idealism and a lifelong dedication to learning. My grandmother spent more than 40 years as a teacher. She was hardworking, devoted, and beloved by her students, so much so that many still write to her even now. Needless to say, she was thrilled when I chose to follow in her footsteps. When I told her I was pursuing my master's degree while working full-time as a teacher, and then this summer began a second degree, she showered me with encouragement and admiration. I feel proud to carry on her legacy as an educator. 96 years of life is no small feat, and through them all, Grandma Pearl insisted on doing things her way, right up until the very end. We will miss you, Grandma Pearl.
Good morning. Thank you all for coming today, and thank you, friends, and thank you, family. 96 is a long time, and yet seems like a minute. You can see why Pearl was such a proud grandma. She loved the accomplishments of Dr. Mike, Attorney Hillary, Teacher Brooke. She was so impressed by your drive, your commitment, your ambition. She'd marvel at how smart each of you are, and each in your own way. And by the way, she enjoyed taking credit for that. She really loved the three of you. As you've heard, Pearl was a first-generation American born in the Bronx. Her father, Samuel Meppen, emigrated from Poland to escape the Russian Revolution and the Russian army. Her mother, Edith, was sent here by her parents from the Ukraine to avoid being raped and beheaded by the Cossacks. But things were not exactly perfect for Edith, Sam, young Pearl, and her sister Bernice in America. Work was tough to come by during the Great Depression, and Sam and Edith often could not afford the $37 a month rent for their small one-bedroom apartment on 2160 Bolton Street. Bernice and Pearl slept in the living room on a pull-out sofa bed.
probably why my mother always made her bed and gave that to me every day, because there was no room there. One great feature of that apartment was the elevated subway train that was 20 feet away from their living room window. Subway would whish by every 15 to 20 minutes. And I remember listening to it. My grandmother lived in that apartment well into the 1990s. But yet Pearl flourished during those troubled times, skipping 3 grades in school, graduating from Queens College with a Bachelor of Arts. She later got a master's equivalent as she got her certification as a New York City public school teacher. Mom was smart, beautiful, a great teacher, and as many of us know, highly opinionated, and at times known to be more than a little bit stubborn. Was she a bit difficult? Well, we're not going to talk about those parts of Pearl today. Pearl students loved her. Over the years, more than a few of them kept in touch, often sending her letters and sometimes taking her out to lunch. You know, a couple of those letters came to the house this week. She was passionate about education, and she imparted a love for learning to me that endures to this day. She'd come home every night, make dinner, and then sit at her desk until 9 p.m. to prepare her lesson plan for the next day. I don't think she ever used the same lesson plan twice. Pearl was a devoted mother. She never gave up on my brother Stephen, who was born with hydrocephalus, endured 19 operations, and passed away at the age of 19 and a half. She had a will of iron, and nothing was going to stop her from making my brother well, which the doctors had falsely promised her he would be. But in their defense, they didn't know. That was quite a test for my parents, for me, and for our entire family. For the first 5 years of Stephen's life, Pearl spent more time with him at Children's Hospital in Philadelphia than she did at home. Her parents, Sam and Edith, spent a lot of time helping out, and Saul was often in the position of being a single father to me. Yet my parents and our family never wavered. Pearl and Saul were a great example of what marriage, love, and commitment between two people really means. Solly Drabkin. Pearl fell madly in love with Solly Drabkin. They met in the Catskills at Lesser Lodge, where Mom was a waitress, and as you've heard, Dad was her busboy. And as you've heard, Pearl readily admitted, maybe proudly, that she was a terrible waitress. She was notorious for spilling the chicken soup on her customers at Friday night dinners. Since she was a pretty 19-year-old girl, however, patrons were generally forgiving, and the tips were generally good. But Pearl would always say that Solly would get the biggest tips because of his big smile and ample dimples. They really were two crazy kids who liked to have a good time. They married on New Year's Eve, 1949, and my dad needed to get married so he could keep his benefits under the GI Bill. On a night worthy of being in a romantic comedy, they knocked on the doors of any judge in Westchester County whose address they could find in the phone book. Finally, around 11 o'clock, they got a judge and his wife out of bed to marry them in their pajamas. The judge officiated in his silk pajamas while his wife, in her bathrobe, played the wedding march on the piano. Pearl and Saul promptly eloped for Detroit, where Dad was in school at Wayne State University. They did come back to New York a few months later for a second traditional Jewish wedding. So during those first few years together, Pearl worked as a welfare inspector in Detroit because there were no teaching jobs. Dad was at school, but he worked part-time in the cafeteria and sometimes on the night shift at the auto plants in Detroit. They even had the folk singer Pete Seeger sleep over in their tiny studio apartment one night. They had a wonderful life and a ton of friends. My dad, among other things, was a great ballroom dancer and a jitterbug champion. Mom, not quite as technically skilled as Dad, but loved to dance. I never saw the two of them happier than the times they were on the dance floor together. And as you've heard, Yiddishkeit ran very strong in our family. Pearl had a great love for her Jewish heritage, even if organized religion was not her thing. She was incredibly proud of her father Sam's work in leading the restoration of the Jewish cemetery in Żorodów, Poland. Pearl carried on that work, and our family continues to be really involved with Żorodów today. I'm really happy that Pearl got to meet Michael's wife, Victoria, and to spend some time with her great-grandchildren, David and Gabriella. She really adored them. Pearl was also very fortunate to have in Eva a daughter-in-law who made sure that Pearl was a part of so many of our family celebrations and who behind the scenes was so involved in getting Pearl the care she needed. Mom, you always had the strength of your convictions. You had a strong vision of how things should be. You lived your life your way. When Dad passed away in 2008, you wouldn't leave the house. You lived there since 1954. That was your home, the place you and Dad were together for 54 years. As long as you were there, he was there for you. I'm so glad you were able to do that. Pearl, Meppen, Drabkin, Mom, we love you. We will miss you. I know that you and Dad are at last together again, and I know the two of you will keep dancing. Thank you.
Thank you all for those beautiful words as you describe such a remarkable woman. Which brings me to a poem that I'd like to read from for you. It's a very old poem, comes to us from the words of Proverbs, and it's called Eshet Chayil, a woman of valor. A woman of valor who can find? Far beyond pearls is her worth. She spreads out her palm to the poor and extends her hands to the destitute. Her mouth is opened with wisdom, and the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. She oversees the ways of her household and partakes not of the bread of laziness. Her children arise and praise her. Her husband lauds her as well, and I can include here her grandchildren as well. Many daughters have accomplished well, but you have surpassed them all. Grace is false, and beauty is vain. A woman who is a good Jew, a good person, she should be praised. So give her the fruits of her own hand, and let her deeds praise her as she enters heaven. I'd like you to stand at this time as I'm going to recite the memorial prayer, after which Rabbi Bachman will take the family out together with the funeral procession, and he will officiate the burial. I guess we'll have a little bit more instructions from the funeral director after the memorial prayer. El mare rachamim shochein bamromim המצא מנוחה נכונה על כנפי השכינה במעלות קדושים וטהורים כזוהר הרקיע מסיירים את נשמת פסח בריינה בת אברהם שלמה שהלכה לעולמה בעבור שאנו מתפללים בהזכרת נשמתה בגן עדן תהא מנוחתה לכן בעל הרחמים יסתיריה בסתר כנפיו לעולמים, וצרור בצור החיים את נשמתה, אדוני הוא נחלתה, ותנוח ושלום על משכבה, ונאמר Amen. God, full of compassion, who dwells on high, grant proper repose on the sheltering wings of your presence, and the lofty levels of the holy and the pure, who shine as the brightness of the firmament, unto the soul of Pearl Meppen Drabkin, Pesabrina, Bat Avraham Shlomo, who has gone to her world, and for whose memory we all pray. May her repose be in paradise. May the Master of compassion bring her under the cover of God's wings and bind her soul in the bond of life. May the Lord be her heritage, and may she repose in her resting place in peace. And let us say Amen. Please remain standing and allow the family to follow the casket before we all leave the sanctuary.